Hey guys, welcome back. It's been a little while since my last video. I've been away doing some travelling and then I lost my voice, which was a bit rubbish, and I'm still a little bit husky now, and I've just not had a chance to record as often as usual, so I'm sorry about that. But I'm back today and I wanted to talk about iOS and the expected iOS 16 update, which we'll be getting at the end of the year, which will likely be revealed at Apple's WWDC keynote event on June 6th. With last year's iOS 15, we got a bunch of new features and updates like live text for smart text detection in photos, focus modes for filtering out app notifications for different people during different tasks, all new 3D views in the Maps app for some cities offering more detail than before, redesigns of the weather app with beautiful new animations, and to Safari 2 with the address bar getting moved to the bottom and new swipe gestures for tab navigation. So today I wanted to sort of put out there my wish list for iOS 16. iOS is a pretty mature mobile operating system now, but there's definitely some features that could still be added or improved upon, so let's get started. And maybe, who knows, we might get a couple of these in the update. And I've seen a couple of really cool concept videos too that people have made, which I'll show throughout the video and I'll link to below. And I'd love to hear what features you'd like to see too, so drop them in the comments below so I can read them. First up is widgets. These came about in iOS 14, allowing them to be placed on the home screen for the first time, effectively replacing the old widgets we had, which were limited only to the Spotlight search page. The new widgets came in all sorts of sizes, and they gave app developers new ways of displaying glanceable information from their apps on the iOS home screen. The new widgets are really pretty design-wise, with Apple offering some design guidelines for developers to follow, but they are actually less functional than some of the old Spotlight widgets. The old widgets were interactive with specific buttons or controls on the widget itself, which you could use for specific things. But the new widgets are really only for displaying bits of information with limits to how often they can update. And this change was most likely done as a way to stop widgets from hogging resources and draining battery now that they're always visible on the home screen. But I'm really hoping that Apple finds a way of bringing back some of that interactivity to widgets. For example, I use the Moment app widget to jump straight to some of the shooting presets that I've made, but I have to have a separate widget for each different preset, and that takes up a lot of space on the home screen, even when I'm using the smallest size. It'd be great if we could have multiple presets to jump to from a single widget, and that's just a really basic example of better interactivity, which shouldn't take up too much system resources as they're basically just links. We could maybe get more complex interactions with live widgets of things like a music player with controls and a scrubber. And just to put it out there, I'd love to see a new 2x1 widget size. I think there could be some really good uses for a new smaller widget than the current smallest, which is 2x2. While I'm talking about widgets in the home screen, I also want to talk about another change I'd like to see, and that comes with app placement, and just how much of a nightmare it is to move things around on the home screen. Icons and widgets snap to the home screen from left to right, filling each page top to bottom, meaning that just trying to move a single app icon can totally mess up and change your home screen layout. It's a real pain to sort out. And I don't move things around often, but on the occasions that I do, I'm just always reminded of how much of a bad experience it is. So I'd like to see a simple change, and that's to remove the automatic snapping and just let us place icons and widgets freely. That way moving things around becomes much less of a hassle, and it opens up new ways for us to organise and design our home screens, placing things wherever we want. Still with the grid alignment to keep things tidy, but with more freedom of placement. A fairly small change if they do it, but I think it will make a really big difference. So next up, I want to talk about the camera app. Apple loves to talk about the cameras on their phones. In fact, they take up a really big chunk of time in their keynotes when they're announcing them. Especially on the Pro iPhones, the cameras are one of the defining differences in the iPhone lineup. And I love the iPhone cameras. I think that the hardware is fantastic, and it's one of the things that I get most excited about when new iPhones come along. But the camera app, I think, is not so pro, and I've talked about this before in an older video all about my favourite camera apps. The native app lacks any sort of control over settings, so things like setting your shutter speed and your white balance. You kind of get some exposure control, but not really. And there's no way to dial in your focus. You have to use the autofocus or tap on the screen, which might knock your framing. Other camera apps have things like focus sliders and control over all the settings which I just mentioned. I really like to use Filmic Pro and the Moment app, just to name a couple. And these apps even include things like focus peaking and exposure guides too, which are really useful when setting up your shot. And all of these settings are really important when shooting, as they allow you to keep your shots looking consistent from scene to scene when you move from one place to another while keeping your white balance locked, or for getting smoother footage by setting your shutter speed and shooting with an ND filter to get that nice smooth motion blur in your footage and make it look more cinematic and less stuttery and phone-like. You can check out my ND filter video if you'd like to learn more about how to do that. So I'm really hoping that we get a Pro Mode toggle in settings for the camera app. I get that Apple probably wants to keep things simple and more point and shoot, as that's what most of their users are going to want. They don't want to have to figure out how to take a good photo or video. They just want to press the shutter button and not think about it, and that's fine. But giving Pro users a toggle in settings to unlock all these features, making them optional, would be a great way of adding them without confusing any other users. And I just think I'd really like to see what Apple could do with all of their knowledge of their camera hardware when making an app with some Pro settings. I just think it would be really interesting to see. So a camera app with Pro settings, please. Another feature I'd really like to see is one borrowed from iPadOS, and that's split view. On the iPad, you can have a couple of apps open side by side, allowing you to use two apps at the same time. And I think that this feature could work really well on the iPhone too if it's implemented properly. It would probably have to be limited to a vertical up and down layout when in portrait mode, instead of a left and right side by side layout like on the iPads. But I think that it would be a really good way of multitasking on the iPhone, which just doesn't exist at the moment. Now, it might be a bit too cramped to have on some smaller devices like the SE or the Mini, but I think that there's definitely enough screen space on the Pro and the Max size iPhone to make this a worthwhile Pro feature. It'd be great just to be able to drag and drop things from one app to another like on the iPad. The last feature on my wish list that I want to talk about today is one borrowed from the Apple Watch. And that's an always-on display for displaying things like the time or any unseen notification alerts on the lock screen. For those that don't know or don't have one, some Apple Watch models have an LTPO display, which means that they can reduce the refresh rate right down to 1 Hz or once a second. So after a few moments of inactivity, the watch face dims, the display clocks down the refresh rate, meaning that it updates less often, thereby reducing battery usage. But it still remains visible, allowing you to see things like the time or your app complications. The latest iPhone 13 Pros also have LTPO screens, which can clock down to 10 Hz, not quite as low as the watch's 1 Hz, but it still might be low enough to put an always-on display feature onto the iPhone, even if it's just limited to the 13 Pros. And I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how much that would affect battery life, but other smartphone makers and OSs out there have it, so it's definitely something that is possible. This was a rumoured feature though of the 13 before it was announced, so maybe it's something that got delayed, or maybe we'll just never see it on iOS. Either way, we'll know for sure in a few weeks if the feature comes with iOS 16. So that's been 5 of my top wishlist features. Hopefully we get like maybe 1 or 2 of them that make it into the release. There have been a few rumours going around of some potential changes and features, but we'll have to wait until June to find out. Let me know in the comments below if there's a feature that you really want to see, maybe something that's still missing from iOS that you really think needs adding. And if you've enjoyed this video, remember to hit the like button, it really helps the channel out. Consider subscribing if you'd like to see more tech videos from myself. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.